Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'll post the link up afterwards in case you want it again, but yeah, we're live. So what's tonight? Tonight is, well, you've all hopefully written some JavaScript. I know this is beginners, but I assume that you're familiar with things like var thing equals thing. Like hopefully you know what that means. Although some people say it wrong, I guess. Some might say I'm storing the value 2 in the variable called num. While I think technically you should really read it more. This is not correct syntax, but you should read it more like that, where it's I'm actually pointing this thing called num at a value somewhere in memory that holds the number 2. So it's more like a plug being plugged into a value. So just go to your senior developers with that, and they'll be like, "Oh, cool, you know a lot." So it's not really 2 is being saved in the num. It's more that num is being pointed at 2, so that when I type num, it gives me 2. So that's expected. Okay, so that 2 is a number. In JavaScript, we call it a primitive type because it doesn't do much. It's not like an object or an array. It's a primitive type. So tonight, 2 things that we kind of want to cover. One is this idea of assigning by / passing by value and by reference. Let me come in here. I think I can come into Zoom. Let's do that. Let's do, okay, cool. So this idea of, okay, so let's see, num is 2, and then I've got var, again, foo equals 3. So I've got num, I've got foo. Cool. So num is 2, foo is 3. What if I set num equal to foo? So now num is 3, foo is 3. So what happens if I set foo equal to, let's say, num plus 1? So foo was 3, num was 3, and now I'm setting foo equal to whatever num was plus 1. So if I hit enter, I get 4. So that means foo is 4, and num is 3. And hopefully that makes sense, because there's nothing really special about that. The important thing in the background is, again, these are all 1, 4, 3, 2. These are all, they're primitive types. They're numbers. They are values. And when I set one equal to the other, I'm ultimately kind of making a copy. Nothing about them is really shared. So foo is a new copy of something else. It's different with objects and arrays. So let's do something interesting here. So if I'm going to refresh, let's do that. So if I say var num equals 2, okay, so I've got num to assign the 2. Now what happens if I pass num as a parameter into a function, I seemingly change it, and then I access it again. So I'm gonna write a function here, and I've written it before, as you can see. So I'm gonna explain what this does, I promise. Num equals 4. So I'm defining a function here. I'm about to call it. So this function, it's called numFn. It takes a single argument. It just so happens I'm just saying it's going to take an argument, and what I want to do to this argument is set it equal to 4. That's really all this is saying. I could call this f just so that we don't get confused here. I'm passing an argument, and I'm setting that argument to 4. Cool. So again, I've now made that function available, so I can call it, and I can actually now pass in num, which is 2. So I do that. It's okay that I get undefined back. The question now is, what is num? Is num 2 or is num 4? If you'd like to answer, you can go on unmute and speak up. I'll give you about a couple seconds here. Do you think it's 2 or do you think it's 4?
4.
Okay, we got 1 for 4. Does anybody else want to disagree? Cod or Britt? Anybody want to disagree?
I think it's 2.
I think it's 2, okay. Britt, do you want to posit a guess?
I think it's 2.
Okay. So we got 2, I'm going to say fairly unconfident, and 1 for 4. So if I type num, it is 2. The question is, why the hell is it 2 and not 4? And the answer is the point of tonight's lesson. The answer is primitive values like numbers and booleans like true and false, things like undefined and null, and strings, they're primitive. They are assigned and passed into functions as values, meaning a copy of them is made, and anything that you do to that copy doesn't affect the original. So the fact that I passed it in here, and I seemingly thought I changed it to 4, you didn't. You created a local thing in here, you set that into 4, and none of what you're doing in here affects this outside thing because it was a primitive value. Now that is very different for things like objects and arrays, which we'll see right now. So if I say var obj equals an object, and name is, we'll just give it my name. So here I'm initializing an object, storing it in this alias obj. It has one property, and that property is a string called Robert. But the whole value is a kind of a what's called a compound value. It's an object. So push enter. If I type obj, we see I get this cool thing. It's got a proto on it, so we know this is a complex object. Right now, it's only got one property. So now, if I write a function that takes in some, I'm just going to say ob for object. Well, there are 2 things I can do in here. So I'm going to pass in an object, and let's say I set the ob, and hopefully you're familiar with the syntax, name to Rob, or let's just do something very different. Kelly, cool. Okay, so here's a function. It expects an object, and what's it going to do? Well, it's seemingly going to change the thing, the property of that object called name. Whatever's stored in name on this thing that it expects, it's going to set it equal to Kelly. Okay, very interesting. So now when I call obj, or actually, I'm going to pass it to obj or function, cool. I'm going to give it object. Okay, so I won't go through the rigmarole of you guys guessing again, but if I now output obj, the question is, did I just throw this thing a copy, or did I throw this thing obj? So will the name still be Robert, or will it be Kelly, meaning it's changed, or whatever happened in here, just like with 2 and 4, in no way affects what I threw into it. And as you can see, it did indeed affect it. So I literally passed in this object right here into this function, which I'm going to go back again with the number or even the string hex. So if we say string equals Robert, cool, make a function here called string function. It takes in a string. And I'm going to say string equals Kelly. Here I'm not messing with an object. I'm just literally saying more or less change the string to Kelly. So now if I call it with string, we see that string is still Robert. And again, strings, numbers, booleans, undefined null are primitives, and they do not get passed in. They don't get passed in here. They are duplicated, more or less, and that duplicate is what gets affected in here. The original is in no way affected. But with objects and arrays, they very much so are. So again, assigned by value, assigned by reference. This idea here is this is assigning it by value, and if I say var other string equals string, so now I've got other string, well, where are we, is Robert, and string, stir, is Robert. And if I say other string equals Kelly, then you would, whether you would or not, string is still Robert, because you honestly didn't, so you set other string to string, you're making a duplicate of the value that was in string. There is no live relationship between these two things with primitive values. With objects, it's completely the opposite. So I think I still have object named Kelly, cool. If I say other obj equals obj, so now I have two things. So now other obj is the same object. Obj is that object. So if I say other obj dot name equals Robert, well then, oh my goodness, I changed obj without maybe realizing it. Probably not good. So again, it's objects and arrays. When you store one in the other with their variable names and passing into functions, you run the risk of potentially changing them when you may have thought, oh, I'm passing it in, it's always going to make a duplicate, it's good. Or maybe you've been confused because you thought that when you pass in a number or a primitive into a function that it would change it, and it's actually not. So again, passing by value, passing by reference. Value means it's copying it. Reference means it's literally referring to the thing that you passed in, and there's the very real risk of it changing things when you didn't mean for it to. Now, the second thing, and kind of what this is getting at, is this idea of mutability, which if you know X-Men, you know mutants, mutation. It's this idea of changing things. And same thing, primitives versus objects. So let me refresh the page here. So again, I'll go back to num. So again, we have num equals 2. Now, you might think that when I say num equals 4 or num equals 5, what do we think I did there? Do we think that I actually changed 2 to 4? Did it somehow add 2 to it? Did it somehow do something cool? Because what really happened was I just pointed num more or less at a completely different space, or I generally completely changed the space in memory, the value that it was at. So like if I say num equals num plus 2, it gives me 6, but in no way did I change 4 into 6. I reset the value completely, because you cannot change, you cannot mutate primitive values. So a really exemplary idea that is, so if I say var name equals Robert, I have a string. I can access the O in my name by saying name 1. Name 1 means get me the item at index 1. Cool, that's the O in Robert, so I got O. What if I try changing it? So if I want to be Rybert, if I ultimately want my name to be this, I can say name 1. You'd think I could do this, equals Y. That we would assume if strings could be changed, I could do this. And when I press enter, you'd think it works because there's no error. So when I say name, I may be surprised to find out that didn't actually do anything. And that's because JavaScript failed quietly. It didn't tell me it failed, but you cannot mutate, change, adjust a string because it's a primitive value. Same thing with numbers, same thing with, okay, so var bool equals true. Booleans are one or the other, it's either true or false. If I set bool equal to false, I'm resetting its value. I am in no way changing true into false. It's the opposite with objects and arrays. They can be mutated, and they are whenever you mess with them. So if we have an array of numbers, we got 1, 2, and 3. And if I say array 0, which is 1, equals 2, then when I look at my array, I have just changed that array. I have mutated it. So arrays are absolutely mutatable, and objects are too. But again, primitives, things like strings and numbers, Booleans, undefined null, it's just very important to realize while it looks like you have changed a 2 to a 4 by saying, take the thing that stores 2 in it and add 2 to it, you are always completely resetting that thing. And when you pass them into functions, if it's a primitive, you have duplicated the value and you're working with a copy of it. And then when you come out of the function, that thing has been unchanged. Whereas with an object or an array, when you pass it into a function, there's the very possibility that you are changing it. And now I'll introduce a bit of confusion, but I want this to be clear. So let's go back to my object. I'll do, what is it? Count is 2. So here's an object. Property is count, value is 2. So it's an object with a single property value on it. If I make a function now called object function, takes an object, and I say count equals, let's say 3. So I'm gonna, well, I can always just set it to an empty object. Count, let's do 3. So this might be confusing, but here I am not updating, actually this should be object. Cool. So what I'm doing here is I'm not updating count to 3. This is a very different statement than if I said object.count equals 3. I am literally telling object to reinitialize itself to an object where count is 3. So because I'm doing that, and I'm not directly changing count via this lovely dot syntax, let's see what happens. So I'll push enter. I can now use this function, pass in obj, and it's done. So now let's see what obj is. Well, obj is still count is 2. And again, the reason for that is inside of this function, I guess I mistakenly, or I reassigned obj, I attempted to reassign obj to a new object. And when you do that, when you reassign something, the connection completely breaks. So inside this function, I have created this new thing that no longer, maybe it didn't in the beginning, but it no longer is this thing right here. If I had instead done object dot count equals 3, then I'm pretty sure, oh, I have an unexpected token in there, where are we? Ah, that's not good. With that, if I call object function with obj, now obj does in fact have count as 3, because here I was merely changing a property or a value of a property. So I was mutating the object, whereas up here, if I can scroll, I was reassigning, reinitializing something. So it's a nuance, something you kind of have to learn and recognize, but I promise there will come a point in your code where you're looking at these things, you're inside of a function, it's a parameters being passed to it that's either an object or a primitive, and you'll wonder, well, I called it, why is this thing outside of it, why has it changed, or why hasn't it changed? And hopefully now you'll realize, oh, because, again, passing by value, passing by reference, and this idea of mutability versus immutability. So I guess the best thing I can do is, this is a great article, one of a few that I just read, and it's got some great little diagrams in it, so I'll throw this in the comments. But it does a good idea. It does a good job of saying, like, what happens when I make this stuff, when I'm passing the stuff, all that goodness. But in the meantime, that's what I got for you tonight. Let me know if you got questions.
Yeah, I do.
Struggling with something. What's up, Mike?
So a primitive is defined by when you define variable by not having the curly Q parentheses.
Yeah, so primitives are anything that's not an object and array. So objects are these, and arrays are these.
Okay, what was an object again? Sorry.
What's that?
The array, yeah, I know what the array. Okay.
Yeah.
But a string is a primitive, even though it's an array of characters. It's still
so yeah, and it just so happens that JavaScript lets you access it in array-like ways. Okay. So it has a length on it, and you can access the individual characters. That's just kind of the convenience that JavaScript gives you. And that's why it's confusing when it's like, why can't I change the index to this? Because right. Strings are not mutable.
Okay. Okay.
Great question. Yeah. But,
and so another question is, once you define in the curly Q's as an object, you can have whatever whatever's after the dot, you can make it whatever you want, right? You don't have to have a defined variable. It's not like name, count.
So if you just want to literally say like this,
No, like you would say variable, object, yeah, curly Q, whatever you call that thing. Planet, :3.
Yep.
So the planet, you can make planet, that can be whatever you want it to be.
Correct. That could be of any, the value can be of any type.
Okay, so yeah, it could be descriptive to what you're doing. Okay.
Yep. So yeah, again, the important thing here is that so objects are mutable, obviously, because I can say object.planet equals 4, and now I have what I would expect.
Right, okay.
So again, the hairy thing tonight is about if I pass object into a function and I either mistakenly or knowingly change planet somehow by inside of a function saying object.planet, you may not have realized that you are changing object outside of that function. You have passed it in by a reference, and you haven't made a duplicate of it when you passed it in by reference.
And there's no way for a primitive to do a return in a function to have the function actually change the value of it and do a return?
You absolutely can. So I say var num equals 2, and if I want to be able to change num, then I can have my function, so num function num equals 4. So if I want that to stick, if I want to literally set num to whatever is here, I would have to do two things. I would have to do one, I'd have to return num.
Okay.
And two, what's it returning to? I need to return it and keep it stored in num. So I need to update num to the return value.
Okay.
So with that, I think I can, cool, I've got it. And now num, well, num is a function now. So I should have said num equals num function num, because now is not defined. What did I do? I don't know. So you shouldn't make it equal to the function declaration. You should make it equal to calling it.
Okay.
So, sorry for that, but yeah, if you want to set it back to it, you need to set it to the result of calling a function and making sure that function returns something. Yeah. Great question. Deep thoughts. But yeah, anybody else got questions? Otherwise, speak up and let me know if there's something you're working on that you'd love others to help you out with, or I'm always looking for topics for future ones of these. It's usually I stumble upon an article, I'm like, oh, I learned something, and then I schedule an event. So if you got anything, put it in the comments, speak up now, or yeah, try to get it to me somehow. But I'm happy to A, make a topic, or B, let you be the presenter and present that topic. So whatever you want. But that's what I got for you guys.
Yeah, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So I know you kind of covered immutable immutability a little bit. I know with like object.freeze, you can semi make it mutable. What would be like a use case for that? Because once you freeze it,
you said object.unfreeze?
Object.freeze, like because I know once you freeze an object, I think there's absolutely no way for you to undo that, right?
I believe so. I believe that's correct. Yeah. So object.freeze behind the scenes is setting the prototype to mutability false. So yes, you're preventing anybody from writing to it in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it'd be bad if the language let you reverse that, because then in testing you'd have no way to verify that it was indeed frozen.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't unfreeze an object.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, well, happy to give you guys, I don't know, I'd say time back, but these usually end around 8:30, so perfect timing. Thanks for coming. If you got more questions, put them in the comments. I'll send a link. I'll attempt to finish recording this video and upload it to my Dropbox and send that link, so you guys will be good. But enjoy Thanksgiving, and I might do one right before Christmas. We'll see who comes. But I like to try to do one once per month just because it's nice. So,
All right, well, thank you, Robert.
of course, nice seeing you guys again. Cheers.
Thanks, Rob.
Of course, Britt, good to see you possibly for the first time. Come on back. Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Right.